Now the next thing I want to talk about is arcs. Now most organic objects move in sort of arc-like motion. So for example, say we want our ball to bounce around the surface. So we have our kind of anticipation, and instead of him sort of shooting off this way, let's say our character sort of leaps at frame 8 into the air, and sort of, let's say at frame 10 ends up here. So our character kind of anticipates, leaps, jumps in our air, and on 13 sort of lands about here. Oops. Lands down on the grid like that. And leaps, lands at 13. On 15, does a little bit of a, just kind of the weight of his body kind of gives him a little hop. Kind of falling a little bit more. Maybe on 19, he kind of, let's settle him a little bit more on the ground. He sort of rolls around and comes back. So let's go ahead and watch that. He leaps in the air and kind of bounces. Now, we can't really see our arcs. There's two ways of doing this. We can go to our graph editor, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail later, but the animation graph editor here. And what this does is it allows us to sort of see what our ball looks like. So if I select just this ball, you can see all these different arcs. So this is translate Y, and if you want to see what translate which each axis is, you can see that the green arrow is Y. So that means if we click on this, we can just look at how our ball sort of jumps in the air on Y. See that? You can kind of see the arcs here. So, and these arcs can be moved in the graph editor to sort of emulate that. We can also smooth out all of these by using these different options here. So we're not going to play with the graph editor that much here, but I just kind of wanted to show it to you. I'm going to show you another way of sort of adjusting your arcs. And so we can kind of see them in our view, and that's by just going up to animate and creating editable motion trail. Now you might have it on time slider, which is good, it shows the whole thing, but we're going to go ahead and do start to end, and we're going to select 1 to 24. And just some of these things you can do incremental or per frame or whatever, and the thickness of the trail and the key size, or you can even select, you can have on or off show frame numbers. So if I leave show frame numbers off and I hit apply, you can see it just shows us our keys. If I hit Control Z, I'm going to hit show frame numbers, and I hit apply, you can see it places the frame number above. Now the first thing you'll notice is this is sort of really ugly arcs. Like, we want actual arcs that look smooth. And what's nice about this is we can actually select our keys on this motion trail and kind of move them down. We can sort of play with it a little bit like that, and you can get a lot nicer. We can sort of look at how we can get a little bit nicer arcs. We can also sort of play with our ball on this, and it'll actually show us the key of our arc. So we can actually create a lot smoother arcs coming this way. And again, you can sort of control the smoothness. You can kind of control the smoothness of this line in the graph editor. So we can go back and kind of view our arcs all together. So if I press play now, you can see I get a lot smoother bounce. And same thing in here. Say I kind of want to smooth out my 16 and go to 14. Kind of move this up a little bit. Maybe on 16 here, and kind of move that up just a little bit. So again, I'm getting a lot nicer arcs here. And on 18, say I want him to hit harder, so I'll just kind of bring it down and straighten him out a little bit here. Okay. I can actually remove my motion trail by selecting my sphere and going to animate. And you can see it says create editable motion trail. Okay. So now I say I want to remove this motion trail, I can just highlight it, and it's actually selected. They're kind of locked, and I just hit delete. What you'll notice is my animation is still stuck on my ball. Now the next thing I want to talk about is squash and stretch. Now for cartoony animation versus realism, it's the principles are similar, but they're not exactly the same. So you can kind of really play with this in our cartoony scene by really really pushing the squash and stretch on our objects. So for example, as our ball begins to anticipate our jump, what we can do is we can kind of have our ball leap in the air, and when it's at its highest point, which is 10, we can sort of elongate it and sort of have it squash out a little bit and kind of rotate it. So something that looks like this. So you can see he kind of leaps in the air, and as he gets to the high point, he kind of squashes out, and as he hits the floor, or I'm sorry, he stretches out, and as he hits the floor on 13, we can kind of squash him and sort of remove the rotation on our X. I'm going to give him a really good squash to kind of show you sort of how this works. So he's kind of moving here, and actually maybe we'll have him like squash on 8 a little bit. So kind of like a person, you know, you kind of squash down before you leap. Then he kind of squashes and he leaps in the air, stretches out, and as he lands, we want him to remain the same size. So we want to make sure that his scale, which is 1.3. So let's just kind of do this as 1, 2, 1. Stays the same. So right before he hits the ground, which is 13, we'll go to 11, and we'll make sure that this is 1, 2, 1. And again, on this frame 12, we're going to do 1, 2, 1. And so right when he hits the ground, he squashes. So he moves, and all these frames, boom, he squashes. And as he comes up, what we'll do on 16 is we'll kind of have him stretch out again a little bit. So he kind of squashes, stretches out, lands and squashes, stretches out again, and we'll have him squash just a little bit on 18 because it wasn't as big of an impact. And we just kind of want to show his weighting. And then he returns to his size, he overlaps, and he comes back to his original position here. And even on 24, just to give it a little bit more realism, we'll kind of have him pass his original position. So let's kind of watch that animation. And so we kind of gave it a little bit of character there. And he kind of comes back on 24. Alright, and that's the end of part 2 of discussing the principles, some of the principles of animation.